Media representation shapes how society views gender, age, race, and identity. For Shawn, true diversity, equity, and inclusion begin with bold, unapologetic storytelling.
It's amazing to see how influential this art form is. So I always say that art inspires art, creativity inspires creativity, and I feel like it's such a privilege and a blessing to do something that I grew up loving when I was a kid. And to think that I'm a working professional now, it's pretty amazing. And it's important to just represent superheroes that look different. You know, I feel like as a creative person, like it would be very boring if everyone looked the same. You and I have two different body shapes. We just look different. And I feel like there are interesting things that come from just differences I find to be very inspiring. There should be characters of all different types. And if you're threatened by that, then that's a problem with you. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Great to see you.
Oh, pleasure. Please,
Looking forward to this.
come on in.
In the Washington, D.C. metro area, I met with comic book illustrator and author Shawn Martinbrough. Over the years, Shawn has collaborated with top writers in the comic book industry, working with publishers like Marvel and DC Comics. Today, he continues his craft as both an artist and a writer.
What were comics that resonated with you, artists that you looked at and said, man, I want to be like that person? Or were those not even conscious thoughts? You just were just into it?
I think when I first started reading comics, I just loved the stories and I loved the art. And then as I really started paying attention, I was like, well, who's drawing this? Because I like this particular style. So there's so many artists growing up that and in no particular order, I can say Frank Miller, Walt Simonson, Bill Sienkiewicz, Klaus Janson, Dennis Cowan, Kyle Baker, Mike Mignola. And Jack Kirby, Alex Toth. There's so many different artists whose work have just inspired me over the years. And once I became a professional comic book artist, it was really weird to meet these people in person because I'm like, oh my God. And then for them to say, hey, we like your work. I'm like, me? It's trippy.
That's got to be a great experience.
Yeah.
But I think part of being an artist, and maybe you can talk about this, is that you kind of have to find your own space. I mean, you've got to become your own artist, right? You can try to emulate them, but that's not going to work. I mean, you've got to be your own person. Can you talk about that journey?
Yeah, I think that of the artists that I named, they have completely different styles, and some of them are similar in their approach. But yeah, I think that as I started really paying attention to art, I would gravitate towards a particular style, and those were artists that used a lot of shadow, a lot of black, heavy blacks in their storytelling. And so Frank Miller was, very known for his noir style. You had Mike Mignola, you had Bill Sienkiewicz, you had David Mazzucchelli, and these are people and Alex Toth is like the sort of the godfather of this. And I just really gravitated to that. Also, going to an art high school and art college, they tell you to study the masters. Now, when you're younger, you're like, yeah, I don't care about that. I care about these comic book artists. But there really is something to that, looking at the masters and the way they would paint. And so one of the art forms that became my favorite was the Impressionist period, because I loved how if you ever look at an impressionistic painting, it's all the lines are not there. A lot of it's suggestive. So, and the fascinating thing is if you go to a museum and you go to an Impressionist work, if you walk up close, it looks like just crazy haphazard brushstrokes. But if you step back, it all comes together. And I feel like that is an amazing approach. So a lot of the artists whose work that I gravitate to would be artists that wouldn't necessarily draw every single line, every single elbow or detail, but they would kind of suggest things. And they would use shadow to really emphasize the drama in a scene. And that's really how I came about my particular style.
I think about Jackie Robinson, breaking into the big leagues, and you see Barack Obama being president. That there's a kind of like, I think as an artist, like you want representation. Like growing up, you probably didn't see a lot of it. I mean, maybe you can talk about that. And then how do you get to where you achieve that? And what's the feeling?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Okay, so back when I was in high school and back when I was looking to break into comics, it was before the internet, if anyone can even imagine that. There was no cell phone, there's no internet. And so a lot of the times, unless an artist, a comic book artist, had a very ethnic sounding name, you didn't know what they were. So for example, like, and a lot of times I didn't even associate the name with ethnicity. So, and I grew up in New York City, which is a very diverse city, but like two of my favorite artists were George Perez and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. For some reason, I didn't even connect that they were Latino, even though like I have Latino friends and I grew up around Hispanics, but I never met them. And so I would say, okay, yeah, they're Latino, but then there are other artists whose names you don't know what they were. Like my name is a very, European sounding name, Shawn Martinbrough. And so when people would meet me, they're like, oh my God, you're Black. And so it's so important though to see yourself doing something. So when I would meet other artists that were Black, like Dennis Cowan or Kyle Baker, and I'm like, wow, they look like me. And that means that I can do this. And it's so important. And I always say that anyone who tells you that representation doesn't matter is already represented. And then they don't think about it. And so they're like, oh, well, what's the big deal? I'm like, well, it's no big deal to you. Big deal to you because you're represented.
But there's been so much talk about, I mean, you hear it all the time, the DEI, especially of late,
Sure.
diversity, equity, inclusion. And you hear a lot of, as you said, if you're represented, you don't really care so much about
No.
that, I guess. Well, what are your thoughts as you hear kind of these arguments about that? And
It's a con job. It's a distraction. It's really like, it's focus on these people over here. They're the ones that are the reason why you don't have what you want. And I feel like at some point in this country or some point in this world, people are going to realize that the real difference isn't between racial groups or ethnicities. It's between money. People who have money and people who don't have money. Those are the people that you need to watch out for, because that working class Latino or Black guy that's your neighbor has more in common with the working class white guy than they will ever have with Elon Musk or a billionaire. The only thing that you might have in common is that you're both white, but that's where the commonalities end. Because if you're a working class blue collar guy that's working on an assembly line, you have nothing in common with Elon Musk. And until people really understand that and start voting accordingly, it'll be that distraction of DEI. That's what it is.
Shawn Martinbrough, author of How to Draw Noir Comics, made history as the first African-American artist to illustrate a monthly Batman series. His vision starts in the mind and comes to life with every bold stroke of his brush.
So I've written the script, and now I'm in the process of illustrating in my script. Our character is riding down a major Paris street with a little inset panel where he's adjusting his gloves. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of sketch out how I would see the scene. And it's a very loose, these are called loose thumbnails. Once I'm satisfied with the line drawing, I will go and tighten it up. Because since I'm working in black and white, you always want to be conscious of creating depth. And you create depth by constantly contrasting black and white, shadows and light. So this way, I can separate our main car from the street.
Oh, wow. It's so funny because it really comes to life in a very quick amount of time.
And this is just really me just creating a blueprint for the final drawing. So the more choices and the more decisions that I make here in the layout phase, the less that I have to do when I'm actually drawing, because I have it all figured out. I know what I'm going to do.
So is it daunting when it's something so recognizable as that, or is that fun that you are working on something that's recognizable?
Well, listen, I want Parisians and to be like, okay, yes, he got it right. That's the most important thing, because this book will be coming out in France, and so you want you want Parisians to say, yes, we believe he was there. We believe he's getting this our tourist attractions correctly. But honestly, it's just a challenge. The challenge is just trying to tell the story in the best way you can, and the most interesting visual way you can.
So I'm told you have a great Barack Obama story.
Yes. Well, my former neighbor was a Secret Service agent. He's now retired, but he was on Barack Obama's detail. So one day I had given him a portrait that I had done of former President Barack Obama. I said, "Hey, listen, could you give him this piece from me? It's a print." Next thing I knew, about a week or so later, he said, "Hey, Shawn, listen, I got a surprise for you." And so I came over to his place, and he gave me the portrait that I had done with Barack Obama's signature on it, which shocked me, because the signature looked so precise. It looked like it was almost printed professionally. And so I was blown away, and so that portrait hangs on my wall to this day.
And you walk by it every day?
Every day, I'm like, wow, that's so cool that Barack Obama signed my portrait. It was amazing to get 20 of the top Black comic book artists that work independently as well as mainstream in one show. And there could be so many more that he had to keep it to just 20. So for those of you who don't know, there are a lot of people of color who work in comics.
How tough is it for minority artists to break in, do you think?
This is the thing. I get this question a lot, and for me, it wasn't a challenge. I think it's different for artists than it is for writers. If you're an artist and you are skilled, you'd have to meet an editor that's a real hardcore racist to be like, I'm not going to hire this guy and make my life easier. Now, so I really haven't faced any adversity in terms of getting in as a professional artist. And also with art, a lot of times they don't see who the artist is. Well, back before there was social media, you would either fax your work in or drop your work in or mail your work in. And if they liked it, they'd give you a call and hire you, sight unseen. But so it was easier for an artist. Now writers, it's a trickier thing, because you have to take the time to read someone's work to evaluate whether or not they can write. And also a lot of editors will hire people that they know. And this is where you get into it, because I feel like a lot of times people are not overtly racist. They just hire who they know. So if you're an editor and your friends are white, you're going to hire people that you know. Now but if that happens over and over and over again, then it'll be less likely that you'll hire someone who comes from outside of your circle. And that's the problem. So, but for me, honestly, like I feel like over the years, I really haven't experienced. Now, I don't know what they say when I left the office. I might have walked in the office. They might have hired me. I went in the office, dropped off the work, and they're like, "God damn, we didn't know. All right, we got to do something about that." But I've never encountered anything.
Let me ask you about legacy, because I think at some point people look back on their storied career and they look back and they say, "I want my legacy to be this." What would it be?
Just that I told stories that inspired people and moved people and made people think. I created art whether it's something that I drew that people looked at and said, oh, wow, that inspired me to draw, or I really was moved by that piece of work that you drew, or something that I wrote, someone saying, wow, I was really inspired by that story. That made me think about like a topic or a theme that I hadn't thought about before. That is what it's all about. And I always say that art inspires art. Creativity inspires creativity. And that's what I've been, fortunate to have a gift to be able to tell a story visually and with words, and for that to inspire someone else.
So let's say I'm a young kid and I watched this interview and I'm inspired by everything you've done. And I picked up your book and your illustrations and your comics. And I want to follow in your footsteps, but AI's out there. What words of advice would you give a youngster who wants to break into this field?
Well, I say this all the time. Draw from life. If you want to be an artist, draw from life. And I don't get me wrong. I know that when I grew up, I would have comic books that I really liked and I would copy the comic books, and that's only natural. But you have to remember that if you're copying someone else, chances are they're copying someone else. So you're copying a copy of a copy. Draw from life. There's no better resource for understanding the human form and things around you than drawing from life. Like, I am not talented enough to make up a figure of a journalist sitting across from me wearing a suit out of my head. And if I do, chances are it'll look generic. But if I took a photo of you and used that as reference to draw from, then I can remember the specifics of your hair, the specifics of the shape of your face, the way the folds drape around your arms in your suit. That's something that you get from life. And so I would definitely recommend for anyone who's aspiring to be an artist, draw from life. I did a workshop with kids in Denver, Colorado recently, and I said, okay, everybody, here's a test. And they were all drawing on digital tablets, which is hilarious because I'm old school. I still draw with a pen and a brush and a crow quill. I said, okay, everybody, here's an exercise. You have 1 minute to draw me. And I struck a pose. And I was just like, and they were like, what? And I said, you can't take your pen off the paper. That's called contour drawing. So I don't want to see any shading. I just want to see one simple line, get my figure down in a minute. And they're like, oh my God. And they did it. And we did it several times, but then they started getting into it. I said, you know what that forced you to do? That forced you to understand the form. And if you keep doing that and doing that and doing that, you'll get better at it. I mean, for me, every day is another day to improve on my craft, because you never stop learning. You never stop evolving if you're an artist, or if you're a true artist.
One thought that came to mind as I was listening to that is, if you draw me, that's the end of your career. But this is the end of our interview. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.